Hi guys. Tonight we wake together before the sun, long before alarms or glowing screens ever existed. You are not jolted awake. Instead, you drift up from sleep as darkness slowly thins around the edges of the room. The air feels cool on your face. Somewhere outside, a bird tests the morning with a single uncertain call. This is how the day begins. In 1700s, America, not with urgency, but with awareness. Your eyes open because your body decides it is time. No switch flips, no clock demands anything of you. Light is coming, and that alone is reason enough to rise. You lie still for a moment listening. The house is quiet but not silent. Wood shifts as temperatures change. A faint draft sneaks along the floorboards. These sounds are familiar companions, not distractions. You probably won't survive this lifestyle if you expect comfort to appear on demand. There is no button for warmth, no instant solution for hunger, no quick fix for fatigue. Everything here must be earned slowly. As your feet touch the floor, the cold greets you immediately. Floors are bare wood, sometimes stone. Slippers are a luxury, not a guarantee. You pull a layer closer around your shoulders and stand letting your body adjust. People in the 18th century did not wake up warm. That is a mainstream historical fact often overlooked, even indoors. Winter cold lingered through walls and floors, and mornings began with stiffness rather than softness. You move toward the faint grey glow seeping through a small window. Glass is imperfect, rippled and thick. It distorts the world outside just enough to remind you that nothing here is mass-produced. Every pane costs money, effort and skill. Some homes still rely on oiled paper or wooden shutters instead. Historians still argue whether early American colonists preferred fewer windows for warmth or simply could not afford more glass. But the result is the same. Light enters reluctantly. Time for you is not a number, it is a feeling. Dawn is not a minute, but a process. The sky lightens, shadows soften. You know roughly how long you have before full daylight, because your body has learned this rhythm. This is one of the strangest adjustments for modern listeners. Without electricity, time stretches, it breathes. It refuses to be chopped into neat digital blocks. You reach for yesterday's clothing. There is no separate sleepwear and daytime wardrobe for most people. Shirts and trousers are reused, aired out overnight, maybe brushed free of dirt. Washing clothes is labor-intensive, so nothing is cleaned unless it truly needs to be. A quirky detail from personal letters of the period mentions people sleeping in their day clothes during particularly cold spells, sacrificing comfort for warmth without complaint. As you dress, your movements are economical. Buttons are fiddly. Laces take time. There is no rush, but there is purpose. The fire from last night has burned low. A few embers may still glow faintly under ash if someone banked it well. Keeping a fire alive overnight is an art form. Fail and the morning becomes harder. Succeed, and you feel quietly proud. Fire is waiting for you. Not yet alive, but ready. You kneel and coax it gently. A breath, a bit of tinder, a careful touch. Flame responds slowly, like something waking reluctantly. The smell of smoke creeps into the room, sharp but comforting. It tells you the day has officially begun. This relationship with fire is not romantic in practice. It is necessary. Without it, food stays raw, rooms stay cold, and darkness wins. One fringe anecdote from the period claims some families name their hearth fires, speaking to them like living creatures. Whether that was widespread, or simply one eccentric habit remains debated, but the emotional bond is understandable. As the room brightens, you become aware of hunger, not the sudden craving modern people feel between meals, but a low, steady awareness. Breakfast is not automatic. It happens after certain tasks are done. Work often comes first. This order shapes your thinking. Food feels earned, not expected. Outside the world is waking too. You hear distant movement, a door cracks, someone coughs, a rooster may crow if you live near one. Sound travels differently in early morning cold. It carries farther, it feels closer. You recognize neighbors by the rhythm of their footsteps, rather than the sound of engines. You step outside briefly, breath clouding in front of you. The sky is pale, not yet blue. Dew clings to grass. The smell of earth is strong. Without electricity, mornings smell alive. Wood smoke, damp soil, animals and human activity blend into a sensory map that guides you through the day. This is how people really lived before electricity, not heroically, not miserably, just attentively. Life required presence. Every small choice mattered, every action had weight. As you turned back inside, fire crackling softly. Now the day unfolds not as a schedule, but as a sequence. Light first, warmth second. Food later, everything in its time. You do not know the hour. Your body already knows what comes next. You notice the darkness most when it refuses to leave all at once. Even as the fire settles into a steady burn and morning edges forward, shadows cling stubbornly to corners and beams. This is not the plight darkness you know from modern bedrooms, gently held back by streetlights and glowing devices. This darkness has weight. It presses in. It reminds you that night is the default state of the world, and light is something borrowed for a few hours at a time. When the sun finally clears the horizon, it does not flood the room. It filters in, carefully diluted by small windows and thick walls. You turn slightly as the light shifts instinctively, positioning yourself where it falls best. People in the 18th century learned to move with the light, the way modern people move with Wi-Fi signals. You gravitate toward brightness without thinking about it. Once the sun climbs higher, the memory of night doesn't vanish. It lingers in habits and choices. You know even now that darkness will return early, especially in winter. That knowledge shapes the entire day. Tasks are chosen with sunset in mind. Delays feel riskier. Procrastination carries consequences. This is a mainstream historical fact that often surprises people today. Before electricity, nightfall truly ended productivity. Candles and oil lamps existed, but they were expensive and imperfect. Light after dark was limited, smoky, and fragile. You did not casually waste it on unnecessary movement or idle work. As afternoon fades, the quality of light changes again. It grows softer, warmer than thinner. You feel a subtle urgency rise, not as stress, but as awareness. There are things you want finished before the room dims too much. You stir the fire, you check supplies. You mentally note where objects are placed, because soon you will need to find them by memory and touch. When dusk arrives, it does so quickly. One moment, the room is usable. The next, details blur, corners dissolve, depth becomes uncertain. You light a candle or lamp carefully. Flame flares, then steadies. Shadows leap across the walls, exaggerating shapes. A chair leg stretches into something long and unfamiliar. Your eyes adjust, but never fully relax. A quirky tidbit appears in several period diaries where people describe speaking more quietly after dark, not out of politeness, but because the darkness made sound feel louder. Whether this was psychological or practical remains unclear, but you feel it now. Voices seem to carry farther in the night. Silence feels thicker. Historians still argue whether fear of darkness was stronger in pre-industrial societies, or simply more acknowledged. Wolves, thieves, fire, and accidents were all real threats amplified by low visibility. Even familiar paths became uncertain without daylight. You move carefully, you count steps. You reach for walls and furniture automatically. The smell of burning oil or tallow fills the room. It is not unpleasant, but it is heavy. Smoke gathers near the ceiling. You know better than to let a flame burn unattended. Fire gives light, but it also steals oxygen and invites danger. Entire towns have vanished because someone trusted the night too much. You settle near the hearth or table where light is strongest. Activities narrow. You do not pace. You do not reorganize. You sit, you mend, you talk. Darkness encourages stillness. It teaches patience without asking permission. Outside, the world has not stopped. It has simply become harder to see. Wind moves through trees, animals stir. The night has its own rhythm, one you respect rather than conquer. You close shutters not to block fear, but to block cold and drafts. The room becomes a small island of warmth surrounded by unknowns. Sleep does not come instantly. Without electric lighting, evenings are longer emotionally. Even if they are shorter in activity, your eyes grow tired faster. Your body notices the dimness and begins its slow descent toward rest. This is another widely accepted historical observation. Artificial light delays sleep. Its absence invites it. There is comfort in this surrender. You are not expected to stay alert late into the night. You are allowed to be tired. You are allowed to stop. In a world without electricity, exhaustion is not a personal failure. It is a signal to listen. You check the fire one last time. You bank the embers carefully, covering them with ash so they might survive until morning. This small act feels ceremonial. Tomorrow's warmth depends on tonight's attention. You feel a quiet responsibility settle in your chest. As you lie down, darkness wraps around you again. Not violently, gently, the candle is out. The room disappears. Your ears sharpen. You hear breathing. Wood ticking as it cools. Something moving outside that you cannot identify and do not need to. This is what darkness truly means here. Not terror, not romance, but presence. It demands awareness, it shapes behavior, it teaches humility. You drift closer to sleep, knowing that light will return when it is ready, not when summoned. Until then, the night holds you patient and complete. You move through the house with a growing awareness that every wall, beam and corner exists for a reason. This home was not designed to impress visitors or showcase personal taste. It was built to keep you alive. Comfort is a welcome side effect, not the goal. As you rest your hand against a rough wooden post, you feel the history embedded in it. Tool marks remain visible. Nothing here is hidden behind polish. The walls are thick, often thicker than modern ones, made of stacked logs or heavy timber framing filled with clay and straw. This is a mainstream historical fact that shaped daily life in 1700s America. Thicker walls trapped heat, better reduced drafts, and offered a small sense of security against weather and wildlife. Insulation was not a material you bought. It was something you built directly into the structure using whatever the land provided. Rooms are smaller than you expect. Space is not wasted on hallways or rarely used corners. Smaller rooms are easier to heat, and heat is everything. You notice how ceilings are lower, forcing warmth to linger closer to where people actually live and sleep. Standing upright, you almost feel the room pressing in gently, as if encouraging you to stay close to the center. Windows are positioned carefully. They face south when possible, welcoming sunlight during the day. North-facing walls often have none at all. Historians still argue whether this was an intentional design choice based on environmental knowledge, or simply tradition passed down without explanation. Either way, the effect is undeniable. Light and warmth are treated as precious resources, not guaranteed features. Furniture feels sparse but purposeful. A table, a few stools, maybe a chest or cupboard. Everything pulls double duty, chest or clothing, and serve as seating. Benches become beds. Beds themselves are often little more than wooden frames with rope supports, topped with straw mattresses or layered quilts. You realize quickly that softness is relative. What matters is insulation, not luxury. A quirky tidbit recorded in several colonial inventories reveals that some households listed their bedsteads as more valuable than their tables. Sleep mattered. Staying warm through the night mattered more. Mattresses were stuffed with straw, corn husks or feathers depending on wealth and access. Each option came with its own smells and sounds. You hear faint rustling as you shift your weight, a reminder that natural materials never stay silent. Floors creak underfoot, not from age alone, but from seasonal movement. Wood expands and contracts with humidity and temperature. You learn to recognize these sounds as normal. Silence, in fact, would be more unsettling. A quiet house might mean cold has tightened everything too much. The hearth dominates the main room, even when not in use. It anchors the space. Furniture is arranged around it instinctively. Life orbits fire the way modern homes orbit screens. You notice how soot stains the stone above it, marking countless meals. Cooked nights endured, winters survived. Storage is visible, shelves line walls openly. There is no hiding clutter, because clutter does not exist in the same way. Everything owned has a purpose. Extra items are rare. This creates a mental clarity you did not expect. Fewer objects mean fewer decisions. Life feels heavier physically, but lighter mentally. You pass your fingers over a wooden latch instead of a metal doorknob. Iron exists, but it is valuable. Metal hardware is used sparingly. Doors close with a solid thud, sealing warmth inside. Drafts are constant enemies. Even small gaps matter. You stuff cloth or straw into cracks without thinking twice. Historians still debate how comfortable people truly felt inside these homes compared to outdoors. Some argue that constant exposure made indoor cold feel manageable. Others believe people were simply more tolerant of discomfort. Standing here now, wrapped in layers, you suspect the truth lies somewhere in between. Adaptation reshapes expectation. You notice the smell of the house, wood, smoke, earth, fabric, human presence. It is not unpleasant. It is grounding. Homes before electricity smelled alive. Ventilation existed through cracks and chimneys rather than fans. Air moved slowly, carrying stories of meals and seasons past. As you settle near the hearth, you understand that this house is not a refuge from the world. It is an extension of it. Weatherlight, sound, and time all flow through these walls freely. The boundary between inside and outside is thinner than you are used to, and yet within this simplicity there is safety. The house holds warmth. It gathers people together. It creates a small circle of predictability in an unpredictable landscape. You lean back against a beam and feel how solid it is. Someone cut that tree. Someone shaped it. Someone raised this place knowing exactly what it needed to do. This is not a house built for comfort later. It is a house built for now. The fire becomes your reference point without you ever consciously deciding it should. You notice how your body angles toward it when you sit, how conversations drift closer, how tools and hands instinctively warm there before work resumes. Flame is not decoration. It is function. It is reassurance. In a home like this, fire is the closest thing you have to a heartbeat. You crouch and adjust a log, listening to the subtle change in sound as it settles. The crackle sharpens, then evens out. People living before electricity developed an ear for this, period. Household notes frequently mention listening to the fire rather than watching it because sound travelled even when eyes were busy. A healthy fire spoke clearly. A dying one whispered and popped uncertainly. Heat spreads unevenly. One side of your body warms while the other stays cool. You learn to rotate slowly, like food on a spit. This looks almost comical from the outside, but it is deeply practical. Even warmth is a luxury here. Balance is achieved through movement and patience rather than technology. Cooking happens here too. Everything does. A pot hangs from a hook darkened by years of soot. You lift the lid and steam rises, carrying smells of grain or broth. Meals are shaped by flame, not timers. You do not rush them. Food tastes different when it is cooked slowly over wood. Smoke becomes an ingredient whether you want it to or not. One overlooked observation from colonial household manuals suggests that families often planned meals around how long the fire would already be burning for other reasons. Baking happened on days when extra heat was needed anyway. Fuel was too valuable to waste. Firewood did not arrive automatically. Someone cut it, someone hauled it, someone stacked it neatly to dry. You glance at the woodpile near the wall. It is smaller than you would like. This awareness never really leaves you. Even in summer, fire is always on your mind. Winter magnifies that concern. There are accounts of people lying awake during storms, not from fear of wind, but from fear the fire might fail before morning. Scholarly disagreement persists over how often fires were kept alive continuously versus relit each day. Some evidence suggests many households tried to maintain embers overnight whenever possible. Other records imply that relighting was common and accepted. Standing here watching the flames, you understand why both could be true. Circumstances mattered, skill mattered, fatigue mattered. The hearth itself bears scars. Stone cracks slightly from the repeated heating and cooling. Ash gathers in corners no broom quite reaches. These marks are not flaws. They are proof of use. A clean hearth would be suspicious. It would mean the house was cold or empty. You warm your hands and feel sensation return to your fingers. This moment is deeply satisfying. Warmth feels earned. Modern heating removes this small pleasure. Here, heat arrives gradually, and your body notices every degree. There is also danger in this closeness. Sparks jump occasionally. You stay alert. Clothing is wool or linen for a reason. Synthetic fabrics do not exist yet, and that absence saves lives without anyone realizing it. Wool resists flame better than cotton. This was learned through experience rather than science. A lesser-known detail from town ordinances reveals that many communities fined households for unsafe practices. Fire spread quickly in wooden settlements. Entire streets could vanish overnight. Fire warmed and destroyed with equal indifference. Respect was not optional. You smell smoke in your hair and clothes. It will stay there. Washing it out requires effort you may not have energy for. Most people simply accept it. The scent becomes part of identity. Homes smell like their fires. People smell like their homes. Familiarity replaces irritation. As evening approaches, the fire becomes the room. Shadows gather beyond its reach. Faces glow amber. Stories sound different when told this way. Words slow down. Pauses stretch. The fire listens patiently. There is no background noise competing for attention. No hum of electricity. No distant traffic. Just flame breath and wood responding to heat. This quiet sharpens focus. You notice small things. A knot in a log. A change in airflow. Someone shifting their weight nearby. Researchers have never fully agreed on whether people felt more connected or more constrained by fire-centered living. It demanded constant attention, yet offered unmatched reliability. Watching the flames, now you feel both truths. Fire limits movement, but anchors life before sleep. You tend it one last time. You pull embers inward, you cover them gently, ash falls like grey snow. This ritual marks the end of the day more clearly than any clock ever could. Morning depends on how well you do this now. You stand and stretch joints, warm back, relaxed. Fire has done its work for today. It will keep watch through the night, if treated kindly. You step away reluctantly, aware that the farther you go, the colder it becomes. In a world before electricity, fire is not something you turn off. It is something you negotiate with tonight. At least, the agreement feels solid. Morning does not begin with a meal. That idea feels strange to you at first, especially if you are used to easing into the day with coffee or something sweet. Here, energy is spent before it is replaced. Your body warms itself through motion long before food arrives. You move because you must not, because you are fueled. You step outside while the air still bites gently at your skin. Breath fogs. The ground feels firm beneath your boots. One well-documented pattern from household journals shows that early Americans often completed their most physically demanding chores early in the day, using movement itself as a way to fight the cold. Stillness was the enemy. Motion created warmth. Wood must be split or gathered. Animals need tending. Water must be fetched. You do not think of these as chores in the modern sense. They are simply the opening movements of the day. Muscles loosen gradually, fingers stiff at first, then obey again. There's a rhythm to it. Lift, carry, set down, repeat. Hunger follows you quietly, not complaining yet. You know breakfast will come, but only after certain tasks are done. This ordering trains patience. Food becomes something you work toward, not something waiting for you automatically. A small but telling detail appears in several farm letters, describing how children learned very early that asking for food before morning work was finished earned disapproval rather than sympathy. You haul water from a well or stream. The bucket pulls at your arm with steady insistence. This is when you truly understand why water was treated with respect. Every drop arrives by effort. Spills feel personal. Carelessness costs time and strength. As you move, the sun climbs higher. light changes again, this time bringing clarity rather than softness. Frost melts, shadows sharpen. You feel warmth begin to spread through your core. It is not dramatic, but it is real. This is how people heated themselves daily by working their own bodies awake. There is an ongoing academic discussion about whether people in the 18th century consumed fewer calories in the morning, or simply delayed eating. Some researchers believe heavy breakfast were rare. Others argue that small meals did exist just later than we expect. What is certain is that eating followed effort rather than preceding it. Inside the fire is settled into a reliable burn. Someone stirs a pot or sets grain to soak. Smells begin to rise slowly. You notice how your awareness of food sharpens as your body works. Hunger feels earned now. Anticipation replaces impatience. One unusual observation recorded in a traveller's diary notes that some households deliberately avoided large morning meals because full stomachs made early labour uncomfortable. Whether this was common practice or personal preference is unclear, but it aligns with what you feel now. Light hunger sharpens focus, heavy fullness dulls it. Hands move efficiently. You waste nothing. Tools are returned to the same place every time. Misplacing something means searching later in poor light or cold conditions. Order is not about neatness, it is about survival. As chores wind down, you finally step back inside fully. Muscles hum with warmth, breath steadies. The room feels different now that you have earned your place in it for the day. You sit briefly, not to rest long, but to acknowledge the shift from effort to nourishment. Food arrives without ceremony. Simple, filling, warm, it does not overwhelm your senses. It satisfies something deeper. You eat slowly, aware that this meal supports the rest of the day. Nothing here encourages rushing. This pattern repeats itself, season after season. Over time, your body adapts. Mornings without food no longer feel harsh. They feel purposeful. You learn to trust the sequence. Work first, warmth second, eating after. By the time breakfast ends, the day already feels underway. You are not just awake, you are engaged. Before electricity, mornings were not eased into. They were entered deliberately, one movement at a time, and without realizing it, you are ready for whatever comes next. Water shapes your day more than you expect. Not because it is rare, but because it demands attention. You cannot forget it. You cannot summon it from a wall or a tap. Every use begins with a decision to go and get it. This simple fact quietly governs how often you wash, cook, clean and drink. You step outside again carrying a wooden bucket that feels heavier than it looks. Even empty, it has presence. The handle presses into your palm in a familiar way. Paths to water are worn smooth by countless feet. You follow them automatically, careful where you place each step. Slipping here means soaking clothes that take hours or days to dry. The well or stream waits where it always has. Morning light glints off the surface. You pause before lowering the bucket, listening. Water has a sound before you touch it, a subtle movement, a quiet assurance. People living in the 18th century often judged water quality by smell and sound as much as sight. Clear water that moved gently was trusted more than still pools. You lower the bucket slowly. It dips, it fills. You lift, feeling the sudden added weight pull at your arm and shoulder. This is when water becomes real. Carrying it back forces you to move deliberately. Spilling feels wasteful. Sloshing feels careless. You adjust your pace instinctively. Many period household accounts reveal that water usage was carefully planned throughout the day. Washing happened in batches. Cooking water was reused when possible. Nothing was poured out thoughtlessly. This was not environmentalism as we understand it now. It was practicality learned through repetition. Back inside the bucket is placed carefully near the hearth. It will serve multiple purposes. Drinking, cooking, cleaning hands, maybe washing dishes later. You dip a cup and drink slowly. The water tastes different depending on the season. Cold in winter, slightly warm in summer. You become sensitive to these shifts. There is a long-standing scholarly discussion about how often people bathed in early America. Some imagine extreme filth. Others argue cleanliness was maintained in different ways. What you experience now supports the second view. Full immersion bathing is rare, But washing hands, faces, and essential areas happens regularly. It is just done with restraint. A lesser-known detail appears in several town regulations mentioning fines for polluting shared water sources. This suggests communities understood contamination, even without modern science. Water was shared, protecting it protected everyone. As the day progresses, you think ahead. How much water will be needed for supper? How much remains? Whether another trip will be necessary before dark. These calculations happen quietly in the background of your mind. They become second nature. You rinse a bowl briefly, saving the water for later use. You wipe hands on cloth rather than washing repeatedly. Small habits add up. Over time, you develop a different relationship with cleanliness. It becomes about balance rather than perfection. Outside, children often help with water hauling once they are strong enough. This teaches responsibility early. Carrying even a small bucket makes the value of water undeniable. There is no mystery about where it comes from. You feel it in your arms. Researchers continue to disagree about whether people drank water more frequently or relied more heavily on beer, cider, and other low-alcohol beverages. Some evidence suggests fermented drinks were safer due to boiling during production. Other sources show plain water was common, where sources were clean. Standing here now, you understand why both could be true depending on location and season. As afternoon light shifts, water becomes heavier to carry, muscles tire. Trips are combined when possible. You bring an extra if you can. Running out after darkness complicates everything. The bucket sits near the hearth again, a quiet reminder of effort already spent. You glance at it often without realizing why it represents security. Without a cooking stops, cleaning stops, comfort shrinks. In modern life, water fades into the background. Here, it stays visible, audible, tangible. It teaches patience, it teaches foresight, it teaches respect. By evening, when you take another drink, it tastes different again. Not because the water has changed, but because your body knows the work behind it. Thirst is not irritation. It is acknowledgement. As the fire crackles and shadows stretch, you feel a subtle satisfaction. The house has what it needs for the night. Warmth, light, water. These are not conveniences here. They are achievements. You sit back, muscles tired but steady, knowing tomorrow will begin the same way. Bucket in hand, path underfoot, water waiting indifferent to how urgently you need it. And somehow that feels grounding. Cooking unfolds at a pace that feels almost ceremonial once you surrender to it. Nothing clicks on, nothing preheats itself. The fire decides the rhythm, and you follow. You add wood carefully, watching how flame responds. Too much, and the pot boils too hard. Too little, and everything stalls. Heat here is negotiated, not controlled. You hang a kettle or pot just close enough to the fire to coax warmth into it. Steam rises slowly, carrying the scent of grain or vegetables. Meals begin hours before they're eaten. This was a simple reality of 18th century households. Surviving account books make it clear that cooking time was built into daily planning, not squeezed in around other activities. You stir occasionally, not because a recipe demands it, but because experience does. You learn to read the sound of simmering. The smell tells you more than sight ever could. Food thickens gradually. Flavors deepen without anyone naming the process. Cooking like this teaches patience in a way no instruction ever could. Ingredients are few. Nothing exotic, cornmeal, beans, root vegetables, salt when available. Meat appears when luck or planning allows. Variety is not expected. Consistency is valued. One visitor to the colonies noted with surprise how rarely people complained about eating the same meals repeatedly, suggesting that familiarity bred comfort rather than boredom. There is an odd but documented habit in some households of cooking extra portions, not for guests, but for uncertainty. Food left over could mean safety later. Leftovers were not laziness, they were insurance. A pot kept warm, near the fire could feed someone late sick or unexpected without starting over. Researchers have never fully settled the question of how closely early American cooking followed European traditions versus adapting rapidly to local conditions. Some evidence suggests recipes traveled intact across the Atlantic. Other accounts show drastic simplification based on available fuel and ingredients. Standing here now, watching the pot, you suspect adaptation won quietly and quickly. You use simple tools, a wooden spoon worn smooth, a knife sharpened carefully, and often nothing disposable. Each object carries memory in its surface, a groove where a thumb rests, a darkened edge from years near flame. Time stretches. While food cooks, other tasks continue. Clothing is mended, tools are repaired, children shell beans or grind grain. Cooking is not a separate activity, it is the background to everything else. This integration shapes how meals feel. They are not events, they're continuations. As afternoon light shifts, the fire is adjusted again. You do not want too much heat. Now you want steady warmth. This subtle control takes years to learn. People spoke of good cooks not in terms of taste, but in terms of fire management. Mastery was measured in consistency. An overlooked note from a mid-18th century diary describes a cook recognizing supper was ready, not by sight but by the way the room smelled balanced rather than sharp. This sensory awareness develops naturally when you cook the same way every day. When the meal is finally served, there is no rush. Food is eaten slowly, partly from habit, partly because it is hot. You savor warmth as much as flavor. Each bite feels functional and satisfying. Cleanup is minimal. Pots are scraped. Water is used sparingly. Ash helps scour surfaces. Nothing shines. Clean enough is enough. Cooking like this anchors the day. It absorbs time without feeling wasted. It fills the house with signals that something nourishing is on the way. By the time you sit back, bowl empty, you feel settled rather than full. Fire crackles softly. The pot is moved aside. Tomorrow's meal may already be beginning in some small way. Grains soaking, beans resting. Everything here understands patience. And slowly, without effort, the day continues forward. You eat with a different goal in mind. Now flavor matters, but survival matters more. Every mouthful is measured against how long it will carry you, how steadily it will release warmth, how well it will hold hunger at bay when the fire dims and the night stretches out. Food here is not entertainment. It is architecture for the body. You notice how dense everything feels. Bread is heavy in the hand. Stew settles slowly rather than disappearing. Fat clings to lips and fingers. This was no accident. Household records and provisioning lists consistently show a preference for foods that endured digestion rather than vanished quickly. Calories were chosen for longevity, not speed. You chewed deliberately. Meals are not rushed because they cannot be replaced easily. You are aware of texture in a way you rarely are in modern life. Grain has resistance. Meat requires effort. Even swallowing feels purposeful. Eating slowly helps the body recognize what it has received. One quietly revealing detail appears in several frontier letters describing how people judged a meal not by taste, but by how they felt hours later. If warmth held through the evening, the meal was considered successful. If chills returned too soon, adjustments were made the next day. Cooking and eating were part of an ongoing experiment. Fat plays a central role. Rendered animal fat appears in cooking, baking, and even as a spread. It adds weight to meals that lean protein alone cannot provide. This understanding came through lived experience rather than nutritional science. People learned what worked by paying attention to how their bodies responded over time. There is ongoing disagreement among historians about how evenly such calorie-dense diets were distributed across social classes. Some argue that poorer households struggled to access enough fat consistently. Others suggest community shared resources more than records reveal. Sitting here now, you sense that availability likely shifted with seasons, luck, and geography rather than rigid class lines. Vegetables appear when they can often preserved. Root crops keep well. Beans dry easily. Fresh greens are fleeting and celebrated quietly when they arrive. There is an understated joy in eating something crisp after months of stored food. No one announces it. You simply notice the difference. A small but curious practice shows up in several regional accounts, where people intentionally saved the fattiest portion of a meal for last. The belief was that ending with fat helped warmth linger longer into the night. Whether this was physiologically sound or simply comforting is unclear, but the habit persisted. You drink sparingly with meals. Liquid fills space without providing lasting heat. Thick food is preferred. Even beverages tend towards substance rather than refreshment. Broth is valued more than plain water at supper. Warmth inside matters more than thirst. As you eat, conversation stays calm. No one scrolls, no one rushes. The fire provides a soft rhythm. Eating becomes grounding. It anchors you in the present moment without effort. Cleanup follows immediately. Leftover food is handled carefully, covered, stored in cool places. Nothing is forgotten. A forgotten pot becomes a waste here is not just unfortunate, it is dangerous. There remains debate among researchers about how often people experienced hunger despite these careful practices. Some evidence suggests periods of scarcity were common. Other sources imply resilience through adaptation. You suspect both are true. Even well-planned meals cannot control weather or illness. When you lean back after eating, the warmth spreads slowly. Not a spike, a plateau. This is the goal: you feel steady rather than heavy. The fire reflects in polished wood and metal surfaces dulled by use. Everything feels settled. You rest your hands on your stomach and breathe. The day's work has fuel now. The night will be met with preparation rather than anxiety. Food has done its quiet job in a world without electricity. Eating is a strategy as much as a pleasure. Tonight, at least, the strategy holds. Clothing feels less like expression and more like equipment. You notice this the moment you step away from the fire. Fabric becomes your first line of defense, not a finishing touch. Each layer matters. Each stitch exists for a reason. You do not dress to be seen. You dress to endure. You pull a garment closer and feel its weight settle around you. Wool scratches slightly at the neck, but it traps warmth better than anything else available. Linen sits underneath softer, absorbing moisture, so cold does not linger against your skin. This layering system appears again and again in period descriptions, showing a practical understanding of insulation long before the word existed. Clothes are worn until they cannot be worn anymore. Repairs happen constantly. You notice mended elbows, reinforced knees, patches that tell quiet stories of past strain. A shirt might pass through several owners over its lifetime, adjusted and altered as bodies change. Ownership is fluid. Use is what gives something value. One detail, tucked into several probate inventories, reveals that clothing was often among the most valuable personal possessions listed. This surprises modern readers, but it makes sense here. Fabric requires time, skill, and resources. Losing a coat in winter could mean real danger. Extra garments are not fashionable indulgences, they are insurance. You feel the difference between indoor and outdoor clothing. Indoors layers loosen slightly. Outdoors everything tightens. Scarves are wrapped carefully, caps are pulled low, extremities are protected first. Fingers and ears lose warmth quickly, and once cold sets in, it lingers stubbornly. There remains disagreement among historians about how colourful everyday clothing actually was. Some believe most garments were dull and muted due to limited dyes. Others point to surviving pieces and written descriptions that suggest richer colours were common, especially on Sundays or special occasions. Looking down at your own clothes now, you suspect both were true. Daily wear fades. Care preserves special pieces. Shoes deserve special attention. Leather soles transmit cold directly from the ground. You become aware of every step. Insoles of straw or cloth are added in winter to create a barrier. Wet shoes are a serious problem. Drying them too close to the fire risks damage. Drying them too far takes too long. You balance patience and caution constantly. A lesser-known habit mentioned in several regional accounts describes people sleeping in some of their clothing during the coldest months. Not out of neglect, but out of necessity. Removing layers risked losing precious body heat that took hours to rebuild. Comfort was adjusted accordingly. Laundry is infrequent but deliberate. Washing clothes requires water, fuel, and time. Garments are aired regularly to keep them usable between washes. Smell becomes less important than function. Cleanliness is defined differently when effort is so visible. You notice how clothing restricts movement slightly. Nothing is stretchy. Nothing gives easily. This teaches economy of motion. You move with intention. Sudden gestures waste energy. Even sitting down feels more deliberate when fabric resists casually folding with you. Researchers still debate how early Americans perceived comfort compared to modern standards. Some argue people were hardened by necessity. Others suggest expectations were simply different. Wearing these clothes now you feel both truths again. Discomfort exists, but it fades into background awareness rather than complaint. As evening approaches you adjust layers again, more cloth as the fire dims less. As you sit closer, clothing becomes a movable shelter adapting moment by moment. You rarely think about fashion. You think about warmth, dryness, and durability. By nightfall, you feel wrapped rather than dressed. Fabric holds heat the way walls do. It creates a small personal environment that moves with you. This is survival stitched into daily routine. In a world without electricity, clothing is not about how you look. It is about how long you last. Cold does not stop at the threshold. You notice that the moment you settle in for the evening, the door may be shut, the shutters may be closed. Still, the chill seeps in quietly, working its way along floors and walls, settling where heat struggles to reach. Winter is not something you escape indoors. It is something you manage. You sit close to the fire, but not too close. Comfort is always balanced against safety. Sparks jump without warning. Wool blankets are draped carefully. You learn where warmth gathers and where it fades. Certain spots in the room are always colder than others. You avoid them without thinking the way modern people avoid drafts from an air vent. Period descriptions of winter interiors make it clear that indoor temperatures often hovered just above freezing. Breath sometimes fogged even beside the hearth. This was accepted as normal. Warmth was relative compared to outdoors. This space felt protected. Compared to modern standards, it would feel harsh. You layer more cloth around yourself as the evening deepens. Blankets come out early. Sitting still steals heat quickly. Movement is warmth. Stillness is risk. This knowledge lives in your muscles now. You shift position subtly. You tuck hands into fabric. You keep feet off the bare floor whenever possible. Sleeping arrangements reflect this reality. Beds are not isolated pieces of furniture tucked into private rooms. They are placed strategically near the hearth when possible away from drafts. Sometimes several people share one sleeping space. This is not intimacy as modern culture frames. It is thermodynamics. There is a long-running debate among scholars about how common shared sleeping actually was across early American households. Some argue privacy was rare and beds were communal by necessity. Others suggest sharing was situational, increasing during cold spells and decreasing in warmer months. Lying here now, you understand why flexibility mattered more than rules. Mattresses feel different in winter. Straw compresses, feathers shift moisture from breath, and bodies gathers slowly. You notice the faint smell of plant material warming under you. This is not unpleasant. It is earthy, familiar. It smells like shelter. One unusual practice appears in several winter journals describing families placing heated stones or bricks wrapped in cloth at the foot of the bed. These crude bed warmers provided temporary comfort, but required caution. Burned blankets and scorched floors were real risks. Still, people used them because cold feet made sleep nearly impossible. You do not undress fully. Removing layers costs heat you cannot afford to lose. Shirts stay on. Caps may stay on too. Hair is another form of insulation. Blankets are pulled tight. You arrange them carefully, sealing edges to trap warmth. Sleep becomes an exercise in containment. Silence deepens as the night advances. The fire crackles softly. Wind presses against the structure. You hear ice forming somewhere outside. Inside bodies breathe. Wood ticks. These sounds reassure you. They mean the house is still holding. There is disagreement among researchers about how deeply people slept in these conditions. Some suggest sleep was lighter and more fragmented. Others point to accounts of people sleeping through storms and disturbances that would wake modern sleepers instantly. You suspect adaptation plays a role. What you live with becomes background. Your body curls slightly without instruction. This posture conserves heat. You are not trying to be comfortable. You are trying to be steady. Comfort arrives secondarily, like a reward for arranging yourself well. As hours pass, you drift in and out of sleep. Dreams feel closer to waking thoughts. You are aware of temperature changes. A log shifts. Heat flares briefly, then settles again. These fluctuations would frustrate you in a modern bedroom. Here they are, simply part of the night. Cold sharpens awareness, but also invites rest. There is nothing more to do. Darkness removes options. Sleep is not something you chase. It comes when your body is ready. By early morning, the room is at its coldest. The fire is burned low. You pull blankets tighter. Breath warms the air near your face. You do not panic. This is expected. Morning will bring movement. Movement will bring warmth. You lie still, conserving energy. Muscles relax into the mattress. Despite the cold, there is safety here. The house stands. The fire still glows faintly. Others breathe nearby. This is how winter nights pass in a world without electricity. Not easily, not dramatically. Simply, steadily. One breath at a time. Silence here is never empty. Once you begin listening for it, you realize it does not exist at all. What you thought was quiet is actually a delicate weave of small sounds, each one carrying information. The house speaks constantly. You just had to slow down enough to hear it. You lie still for a moment and notice how the building settles around you. Wood contracts as the fire fades. A beam releases a soft pop. Somewhere above, a rafter shifts its weight. These noises are not alarming. They're familiar. People living this way learnt the language of their homes, the way sailors learnt the moods of the sea. Period. Observers frequently commented on how attuned people were to everyday sound. Without engines, fans, or electrical hum, the ear sharpened naturally. A dropped object sounded different depending on the floor. Footsteps revealed who was moving and how hurried they were. Even breathing patterns became recognizable. You hear wind brush against the outer wall, not as a roar, but as a series of gentle pressures. Snow or rain changes the pitch. Ice makes its own thin music. You can tell the weather without opening a door. This skill develops quietly without instruction. One curious detail tucked into a settler's journal describes a family identifying a loose shutter in the dark solely by the rhythm of its tapping. No one got up to fix it until morning. The sound was noted, categorized, and accepted. Familiar noises rarely demanded action. Animals add their own layer. A dog shifts in size. Livestock make distant sounds that reassure you they are still where they should be. Silence from them would be more troubling than noise. Sound confirms presence. Presence means safety. There is no firm agreement among historians about whether people slept more lightly in such sound-rich environments, or simply interpreted noise differently. Some argue constant awareness prevented deep rest. Others point to accounts of people sleeping soundly through conditions that would keep modern listeners alert and anxious. As you lie here now, you feel your mind acknowledging sound without reacting to it. Your body learns which noises matter. A sudden, unfamiliar sound sharpens your attention. A steady one fades into background. This filtering happens instinctively. You do not analyze it, you trust it. Inside the room, fabric shifts softly. Someone turns over. Straw rustles faintly. These are human sounds, comforting in their predictability. They remind you that you are not alone. Solitude here feels different than modern isolation. Togetherness is audible. Even the fire has a voice. Embers settle. Ash collapses gently inward. A sudden crack signals a log breaking down. You register it without opening your eyes. The fire is still alive. That knowledge lets your muscles relax again. Outside something moves. You cannot see it. You do not need to. You listen. the sound passes. Whatever it was, it is no longer close. The world beyond the walls exists, but it does not intrude unless invited. Sound replaces sight at night. You navigate the dark by ear. This shapes behavior. You move more carefully. You avoid unnecessary motion. Noise carries farther. When the world is still, discretion becomes habit. Some researchers suggest that this constant auditory awareness made people more cautious and observant overall. Others believe it simply redirected attention from visual cues to sensory ones. Either way, your experience now confirms that sound is never neutral here. It is guidance. As sleep deepens, sounds soften. Your brain continues sorting them quietly, allowing harmless ones to drift past while remaining ready for anything new. This balance between rest and readiness defines nighttime before electricity. By the time dawn approaches, the house has spoken to you all night. It has told you it is standing, holding, breathing along with you. You have listened without effort. Silence never arrived, but peace did. Work bends itself around the sun without ever announcing the fact. You do not consult a schedule, you read the light instead. Morning brightness invites one kind of labour. Afternoon slant suggests another. As the day shortens, tasks narrow naturally. This rhythm settles into you until it feels obvious, almost biological. You notice how your energy rises and falls alongside the sky. When the sun is high, your body cooperates. Muscles respond. Focus sharpens as shadows lengthen. Effort costs more. This alignment between labour and daylight shaped entire communities, long before clocks attempted to standardize time. Accounts from the era repeatedly show that workdays expanded and contracted with the seasons. Summer demanded long hours, sometimes stretching from first light to near dark. Winter shortened everything, not from laziness, but from necessity. Light was limited. Fuel was precious. Bodies needed rest to endure cold. You choose tasks carefully. Outdoor work happens when visibility is best. Indoor repairs wait until evening. Certain chores simply do not happen after dusk. Cutting wood in low light risks injury. Fetching water becomes dangerous. You learn to accept these limits rather than fight them. One small but revealing habit mentioned in several farm records describes people deliberately leaving easier tasks for late afternoon, preserving strength earlier in the day for heavier work. Energy was managed like a resource. You feel that instinct guiding you now without conscious thought. There is no firm consensus among scholars about whether this sun-undriven routine felt restrictive or freeing to those who lived it. Some interpretations suggest people felt bound by daylight. Others argue the clarity of these boundaries reduced anxiety by simplifying decisions. Standing here watching the light shift across the floor, you sense how structure can feel like relief rather than constraint. Children absorb this pattern early. They know when play fits and when work is expected. No one needs to explain it repeatedly. The sun explains it. A ball or stick lies untouched as shadows lengthen, because everyone understands what comes next. Tools are put away earlier than you might expect, not because the day is over, but because poor light turns simple actions into risks. Hands slow, eyes strain, the cost of mistakes rises. You respect that boundary. There is an understated pleasure in finishing a task. Just as the light fades, completion aligns with nature rather than resisting it. You wipe your hands, stretch your back, and feel a quiet satisfaction that has nothing to do with productivity metrics. Some observers from more urbanized regions commented with surprise on how rural households seemed unhurried, despite working long hours. Without artificial light, urgency softened naturally in the evening. The day had a clear ending. Work did not bleed endlessly into rest. As dusk approaches, conversations change tone, plans narrow to what can be done tomorrow rather than tonight. Expectations adjust downward without frustration. You are not falling behind. You are simply following the day to its close. Researchers still debate how this light-governed schedule affected long-term health and stress. Some believe alignment with natural cycles supported physical resilience. Others argue seasonal labor swings were exhausting. You suspect both held true at different times of the year. You look once more at the sky through the window. Colour drains slowly, blue deepens, the day loosens its grip, inside the fire brightens in response, taking over where the sun leaves off. Work pauses, not because it is finished, but because it is enough for now. Tomorrow will bring light again. Tomorrow will invite movement. For tonight, the sun has spoken its final instruction, and you listen without resistance. Children move through this world differently, not because they are treated harshly, but because they are included from the moment they can walk steadily. They are part of the daily rhythm. You notice it in the way small hands reach for tools sized, just for them, in how tasks are given without ceremony or praise. Work is not framed as punishment. It is framed as belonging. A child shells beans beside the hearth fingers, moving with surprising efficiency. Another carries kindling and careful armfuls, proud not to drop a single stick. No one hovers. Mistakes are corrected quietly. Learning happens through repetition rather than instruction. This approach shows up clearly in family letters, which often mention children contributing to household labour as naturally as breathing. Play still exists, but it weaves itself between responsibilities. A stick becomes a toy sword for a few moments before being used to prod embers. Laughter breaks out suddenly, then fades as attention shifts back to work. You realise that play here is opportunistic rather than scheduled. It blooms where it can. There is a commonly accepted understanding among historians that childhood in the 18th century involved far more responsibility than modern childhood. Yet this does not necessarily mean joy was absent. You see it in small smiles, in whispered jokes, in the ease with which children move between effort and rest. Purpose seems to ground them. One rarely mentioned habit appears in several apprenticeship records, where children were given ownership over small tasks or tools early on. A personal bucket, a specific knife, a corner of the garden. These small claims built confidence and accountability. Possession was tied to responsibility, not status. Education happens to, but not always in a formal sense. Reading may occur by firelight when the day allows. Writing is practiced when paper and ink are available. Knowledge is valued, but survival comes first. Children learn math through measuring grain and tracking days rather than abstract problems. There is no single agreement among scholars about how emotionally burdensome this early responsibility felt to children themselves. Some interpretations suggest it fostered resilience and competence. Others raise concerns about pressure and fatigue. Watching a child settle into sleep quickly at night, you suspect exhaustion played a role, but so did satisfaction. Illness and injury introduce seriousness early. Children are not shielded from reality. They learn quickly what fire can do, what cold can do, what carelessness costs. This awareness sharpens attention rather than extinguishing curiosity. Warnings are specific. Stories are instructive, yet tenderness is present. A hand rests on a child's shoulder as they pass. A blanket is adjusted gently. Voices soften at night. Care is shown through action rather than explanation. Comfort exists, but it is quiet. You notice how children adapt to the dark. Fear is taught less and less reinforced. Night becomes familiar rather than threatening. Sounds are identified. Shadows are accepted. This early exposure changes how they move and rest. Some accounts hint that children slept more deeply than adults, even during storms or cold snaps. Whether this was due to physiology, familiarity, or simple exhaustion remains uncertain. What is clear is that rest comes quickly after full days. As you watch them, you realize childhood here is not a separate world. It is a gradual entry into the same reality adults inhabit. The boundaries blur. Responsibility increases naturally rather than abruptly. By morning, children rise with the household. No special allowances are made. No resentment seems to form. This is simply how life works. Inclusion brings expectation. Expectation brings competence. In a world without electricity, children do not wait to be prepared for life. They grow into it slowly. You begin to understand how little of this life can be done alone. Even the most self-sufficient households rely on others in quiet, constant ways. Community is not an idea or a value statement here. It is a working system without its survival phrase quickly. You hear a knock at the door and know who it is before opening it. Footsteps sound familiar. Voices carry identity. Neighbours arrive without announcement when something is needed, and you do the same. There is no sense of intrusion. Presence is practical. One well-established reality of 18th century America is that isolated households faced higher risks during illness, crop failure, or harsh winters. Mutual dependence was not sentimental. It was strategic. People shared labour tools and knowledge, because doing so increased everyone's chances of getting through the season. You help lift something heavy tomorrow. Someone will help you. The exchange is not tracked closely. Balance is maintained over time rather than immediately. Memory and reputation do the accounting. A person who never reciprocates becomes known quickly. Food moves between houses when necessary. A pot is sent. Bread appears. Meat is shared after a successful hunt or slaughter. These moments are not framed as charity. They're investments in stability. One day, roles will reverse, and no one will comment on it. A seldom mentioned habit appears in several town journals, describing neighbours quietly watching one another's chimneys in winter. A house without smoke signalled trouble. Someone would investigate before nightfall. This form of care required no conversation and no obligation beyond awareness. Work is coordinated naturally. Harvests bring people together. Barns are raised in a single day because many hands arrive at once. The work is heavy, but it moves quickly. Laughter breaks out between efforts. Shared strain bonds people faster than shared leisure ever could. Interpretations still pull in different directions regarding how harmonious these communities truly were. Some accounts emphasize cooperation and trust. Others record disputes, grudges, and exclusion. Living among them now, you sense both realities coexisting. Help does not require perfection. It requires presence. Even conflict follows rules. Arguments happen face to face. Gossip travels, but slowly. Reputation builds over years, not minutes. This gives behavior weight. Actions linger longer than words. You notice how knowledge circulates, remedies, weather signs, building techniques. Advice is given freely but selectively. Experience carries authority. No one pretends to know everything. Learning remains communal at night. Community feels closer. Light in a nearby window reassures you. Sound carries. You know others are awake, tending fires, listening to the same wind. This shared vigilance spreads risk. No single household stands entirely alone against the dark. There is comfort in knowing that if something goes wrong, someone will hear. Someone will notice, someone will come. This does not eliminate danger, but children move easily between houses. They're watched by many eyes. Correction and care come from multiple directions. This shared responsibility reduces isolation and increases continuity. Some observers from later periods remarked on how difficult it was for newcomers to integrate into such tightly woven networks. Trust took time. Familiarity mattered. You earn belonging through consistency rather than declaration. As evening settles, you feel the quiet strength of this arrangement. No formal contracts, no written schedules, just repeated interaction layered over years. Community becomes a structure as solid as any wall. In a world without electricity, connection replaces convenience. People become one another's backup systems, and as the fire dims and night deepens, you rest easier, knowing you are not the only one keeping watch. Illness arrives without warning and without ceremony. You do not receive alerts or early measurements. You notice it first as a feeling that something is off, a heaviness behind the eyes, a chill that does not respond to movement, a cough that lingers longer than it should. In a world without electricity, sickness announces itself through sensation rather than data. When someone falls ill, the household slows immediately. Work is rearranged. Tasks shift quietly from one person to another. There is no debate about whether rest is deserved. It is required. Pushing through sickness rarely ends well here. Bodies are valued tools, and damaged tools need care. Care looks different than you might expect. There are no machines humming softly in the background, no pills measured by the clock. Instead, attention sharpens. Skin is touched to check heat. Breathing is listened to closely. Changes are noticed over your hours rather than minutes. This kind of watching takes time, but time is what people have learnt to give. Period writings leave little doubt that households relied heavily on home remedies. Teas brewed from bark or leaves. Pus is applied carefully, broths prepared slowly. These treatments were based on inherited knowledge rather than scientific certainty. Some helped, some did not. All were offered with intention. A lesser-known practice appears in several personal letters describing how families altered diets during illness, focusing on warmth and ease of digestion rather than strength. Thin grells replaced heavier meals. Fluids were warmed even in summer. Comfort came first. There is no single explanation that satisfies everyone when it comes to how effective these remedies truly were. Some modern interpretations emphasize their limited medical value. Others point out that rest, hydration, and warmth alone could make a meaningful difference. Sitting here beside someone unwell, you feel the power of care even without cures. Community plays a role again. Neighbors arrive quietly. Food appears without discussion. Someone offers to tend animals or finish urgent chores. Illness isolates a body, but it rarely isolates a household. This shared response does not eliminate fear, but distributes it. You become aware of how fragile life feels during these moments. Without electricity, there are no guarantees waiting just beyond the horizon. Recovery is hoped for, not assumed. This awareness does not create panic. It creates presence. Children are not always shielded. They learn early what sickness looks like. They learn when to be quiet, when to help, when to wait. These lessons arrive naturally carried by observation, rather than explanation. Sleep becomes central, fires are tended more carefully. The sick are positioned where warmth holds longest. Nighttime listening sharpens. Changes in breathing or movement are noted instantly. Vigil replaces monitoring equipment. Some accounts suggest people feared illness less because it was familiar. Others argue familiarity increased dread. Living through it now, you sense that fear and acceptance coexist. You do not dramatize sickness, you respect it. As days pass, improvement arrives gradually or not at all. Recovery is celebrated quietly. Strength returns in stages. Work resumes slowly. No one expects immediate normalcy. When illness ends either through healing or loss, the household absorbs the outcome and continues. There is grief when needed, relief when allowed. Life does not pause, but it does adjust. In a world without electricity, healing is not outsourced. It happens here through attention, patience, and care offered one moment at a time. Cleanliness here is not ignored, but it is approached with restraint. You begin to see hygiene as a series of decisions rather than a routine. Water costs effort, heat costs fuel, soap costs time and ingredients. Every act of cleaning carries weight, so nothing is done casually. You wash your hands, but not constantly. You rinse your face in the morning and again before bed. Cloths are used carefully dampened rather than soaked. This pattern shows up clearly in everyday records, which make it plain that people maintained personal cleanliness within the limits of labour and resources, rather than chasing constant freshness. Bathing, as you know it, is rare. Full immersion happens a few times a year for many households, more often in warm months. Instead, the body is cleaned in parts, hands, face, feet, hair when necessary. This approach keeps illness at bay without exhausting supplies. You learn quickly which areas matter most. Soap smells sharp and earthy. It is made from fat and lye, not bought in decorative bars. Using too much dries skin painfully, especially in winter. You ration it instinctively. Clean does not mean scented, it means functional. A small but telling custom surfaces in several domestic notes, describing how families schedule washing days around weather. Warm, sunny days mattered. Clothes were washed when they could dry properly. Damp fabric invited sickness. You feel this concern now as you hang a garment and test the air with your hand. Teeth receive attention too, though not with brushes and paste. Chewing sticks, cloth, and rinsing are common. Some powders exist abrasive and bitter. Whether they helped or harmed remains uncertain. What daily practice reveals is that people cared about oral comfort even without modern dentistry. Homes are swept regularly. Dirt is tracked in constantly, but it is managed. Ash from the hearth is reused for scrubbing. Floors are cleaned enough to function, not to shine. Order serves health rather than appearance. Opinions remain divided on how effective these methods truly were at preventing disease. Some argue limited bathing contributed to illness. Others note that overwashing in cold conditions can weaken the body. Standing here, hands slightly rough from soap and cold water, you sense the careful balance people tried to maintain. Clothing is aired whenever possible. Garments hang near doors or windows, letting fresh air do part of the work. Smell becomes less important than dryness. Dampness is the real enemy. You notice how much attention goes into avoiding it. Hair is managed simply, braided, covered, washed when needed, not daily. Head coverings serve both modesty and cleanliness, keeping dust and soot at bay. Removing one at night feels like shedding a layer of the day. Some testimony points one way, while other evidence complicates the idea that people were uniformly unclean. What emerges instead is a picture of intentional moderation, clean enough to stay healthy, careful enough not to waste strength. As evening approaches, you wipe your hands again before eating, not out of habit, but awareness. You know where they have been. You know what they have touched. This mindfulness replaces routine by night. The house smells of smoke, fabric, and human presence. It does not offend. It feels lived in. Cleanliness here supports life. Rather than chasing perfection in a world without electricity, hygiene adapts to effort, season, and need. It becomes another quiet negotiation with reality. Evenings gather slowly, not with a dramatic shift, but with a gentle narrowing of options. You feel it as much as you see it. Movements shorten, voices soften, the fire becomes brighter, by comparison as the world beyond the walls recedes. This is the hour when activity turns inward. You settle near the hearth, not out of laziness, but because warmth concentrates here. Bodies arrange themselves naturally, forming a loose circle around the glow. This pattern appears repeatedly in personal accounts from the period. Evening was not for roaming the house, it was for staying close, conserving heat and energy together. Conversation drifts, rather than focuses. Stories rise and fall without structure. Someone recalls a memory halfway, then lets it trail off. Silence is welcomed, not awkward. There is no pressure to fill the room with sound. Fire does that work for you. Hands stay busy. A sock is mended. A tool handle is smoothed. A button is reattached. These tasks require little light and less concentration. Evening labour favours the familiar, new or difficult work waits for morning. One small detail that appears in several family journals describes how people judge the success of an evening by how little had to be done. If everything essential was already finished, the night felt generous. If work remained, darkness made it feel heavier. Food may appear again but lightly. A bit of bread, warm broth, nothing demanding. The goal is comfort rather than sustenance. Heavy meals belong earlier. Evening eating supports rest. There is no firm agreement about how common storytelling truly was during these hours. Some narratives emphasize long tales and oral tradition. Others suggest evenings were often quiet, punctuated only by necessary conversation. Sitting here now, you suspect storytelling happened when someone had something worth telling. Not because it was expected. Children grow drowsy early. Heads lean against shoulders. Blankets are adjusted without comment. No one insists on bedtime rituals. Fatigue speaks clearly enough. When a child is ready, they're guided gently towards sleep. Firelight shapes faces softly, features blur at the edges. This low light changes how people appear to one another. Expressions are read differently. Words carry more weight than looks. Judgment softens. A seldom mentioned habit shows up in accounts describing families counting logs before fully settling in for the night. Fuel remaining determined how late the fire would be fed. Running out before morning was unthinkable. Planning extended into the smallest hours. You notice how time stretches here. Without screens or clocks, minutes lose their urgency. An hour can pass unnoticed, or it can feel long and full. Time responds to attention rather than commands. As the evening deepens, conversation thins. Someone yawns. Another stares into the fire, thoughts slow. The day loosens its hold. You feel no guilt about stopping. Stopping is part of... Researchers continue to differ on whether evenings before electricity felt dull or restful. Some portray them as monotonous. Others describe them as deeply restorative. Living inside this moment, you sense how rest feels earned rather than empty. Eventually, one by one, people prepare for sleep. The fire is benanked carefully, candles are snuffed. The room darkens in stages. Night does not arrive suddenly. It is invited. You remain by the hearth a moment longer, watching embers glow and fade. This is not wasted time. It is transition. It allows the mind to follow the body into rest. In a world without electricity, evenings are not about distraction, they're about release. And as the last light softens into darkness, you feel the day finally let go. Sleep arrives differently here. It is not forced or scheduled. It grows out of the dark itself, encouraged by dimness, warmth, and the simple fact that there is nothing left demanding your attention. You do not scroll, you do not delay. Your body recognizes the cues and responds without negotiation. You lie down and notice how the mattress accepts you slowly. Straw compresses with a soft sigh. Feathers shift and settle. The bed is not perfectly flat, but it holds you securely. You arrange yourself with care, not chasing comfort, but conserving warmth. Blankets are tucked in close edges, sealed like a careful envelope. Night before electricity does not promise uninterrupted sleep. You drift awake briefly, then drift again. This pattern appears quietly in many period descriptions, suggesting that segmented sleep was common. People rested, woke, then rested again. Often without concern, waking was not a problem to solve. It was simply part of the night. You open your eyes for a moment and see almost nothing. Darkness is complete, not dim, not muted. Whole, you orient yourself by the fire still breathes faintly. Someone nearby shifts outside, wind moves through branches. You feel present rather than alarmed. A curious practice mentioned in several personal letters describes people using nighttime waking to pray, reflect, or quietly plan the next day. These moments were not labelled insomnia. They were considered useful pauses. Whether everyone experienced this or only some remains unclear. But the night here allows room for thought without pressure. You fall asleep again easily. Fatigue does most of the work. Physical labour leaves the body ready for rest. In a way, modern exhaustion rarely does. Muscles soften, breath deepens. The cold encourages stillness rather than tossing. There is no firm agreement among researchers about how restful this kind of sleep truly was compared to modern uninterrupted sleep. Some argue segmented rest allowed deeper recovery. Others suggest it reflected necessity rather than preference. As you move between sleep and awareness now, it feels natural rather than disruptive. Dreams feel closer to waking thoughts. They borrow sounds from the room. The crackle of embers becomes part of the story. The wind becomes movement within the dream. Boundaries blur gently. You wake again briefly as the fire shifts. Heat pulses, then settles. You adjust a blanket without opening your eyes. Your body knows how. You curl slightly instinctively, protecting warmth. This posture requires no instruction. Outside, the world continues without light. Animals move. Frost forms somewhere far off. Something calls and then falls silent. You register it, categorize it, let it pass. Night here teaches trust in familiarity. Some accounts hint that people feared the night less than we assume, because it was known so intimately. Others suggest fear existed but was normalized. Lying here now, you feel awareness without panic. Darkness is not an enemy. It is a condition. As the hours pass, the cold deepens. This is expected. The room reaches its lowest temperature before dawn. You breathe through your nose, warming the air slightly before it reaches your lungs. This habit develops unconsciously. You have learned how to sleep here. Eventually, the faintest hint of light begins to return. You do not see it yet, you sense it. Night loosens, Sleep deepens one last time before morning calls you back. In a world without electricity, sleep is not managed. It is respected. It moves in cycles shaped by fire fatigue and darkness, and as you rest, wrapped in quiet and cold, the night holds you without demand. Weather is not background here, it is authority. You feel that the moment you step outside and read the air before doing anything else. The sky speaks first. The wind adds commentary. Temperature delivers the final instruction. Plans adjust instantly, not reluctantly. You learn to interpret signs that once meant nothing to you. Clouds thickening at the horizon suggest more than rain. They suggest delay. Frost on the ground warns you to move carefully and conserve strength. A sudden stillness in the air often precedes something harder coming. These observations are not poetic. They're practical. Contemporary observers consistently noticed how deeply people oriented their days around weather, rather than dates. Farming records, travel notes, and household journals all reflect this constant recalibration. Weather did not interrupt plans. It defined them. You choose work accordingly. Certain tasks wait for dry air. Others require cold. Some cannot be done safely at all when conditions shift. You do not argue with this. Resistance costs more than compliance. Accepting weather reduces frustration. An odd but well. Recorded behavior involved people smelling the air before committing to longer journeys. Changes in scent indicated moisture or approaching storms. This sensory awareness seems almost unbelievable now. But standing here breathing deeply, you sense subtle differences too. Storms command respect. Thunder changes posture. Lightning accelerates decisions. Snow narrows the world quickly. You prepare when you can and endure when you must. There is no illusion of control, only readiness. Interpretations continue to diverge on how predictable early Americans found their weather compared to modern forecasts. Some accounts suggest deep familiarity allowed accurate anticipation. Others reveal frequent surprise and hardship. You suspect accuracy improved with experience, but never reached certainty. Rain transforms everything. Paths soften, shoes soak, sound changes. The world smells richer. You work differently, you slow down. You protect tools. Wetness is temporary, but costly if ignored. Cold asserts itself, gradually then completely. Fingers stiffen, breath shortens. You measure exposure carefully. Staying out too long without reason is foolish. Returning inside too early wastes daylight. Balance becomes instinctive. People speak of weather constantly, not as complaint but as information exchange. Who saw clouds first? Who noticed ice forming? Shared observation strengthens community readiness. Knowledge spreads by voice rather than broadcast. Some first-hand accounts imply that people felt less betrayed by weather than modern populations do. Without promises of comfort, expectation remains flexible. Disappointment softens. Acceptance grows. At night, weather becomes audible rather than visible. Wind presses. Snow slides. Rain drums steadily. These sounds influence sleep but rarely panic. You learn which ones demand attention and which simply accompany rest. Morning after a storm feels earned. The air clears, light sharpens. Work resumes differently but willingly. Survival continues. In a world without electricity, weather does not decorate life. It directs it. And by listening closely, you learn to move with it rather than against it. Tools become extensions of your hands long before you think of them as objects. You recognize their weight, their balance, the slight irregularities that make each one familiar. Nothing here is disposable. When something breaks, it matters. Replacement is uncertain. Repair is expected. You reach for a tool and already know how it will feel. The handle fits your palm because it has learned your grip over time. Wood is smoothed where fingers rest. Metal has dulled from years of contact. These marks are not flaws. They are evidence of partnership. Everyday practice makes it clear that tools were owned sparingly and used relentlessly. A single axe might serve for chopping, splitting, shaping, and repairing. Knives perform dozens of roles beyond cutting food. Even simple items carry layered purpose. Specialization exists, but minimalism dominates. You maintain tools constantly. Edges are sharpened, handles are tightened. Rust is watched carefully. This care happens in small moments rather than grand sessions. Neglect compounds quickly. Attention prevents failure. A small but telling custom surfaces and several workshop notes describing how people named or mark their tools subtly. Not for ownership disputes, but for familiarity. Knowing exactly how your own tool behaves saves time and reduces mistakes. Subtle differences matter when margins are thin. Work feels slower with hand tools, but it is not inefficient in the way you expect. Movements are practiced, waste is avoided. Precision comes from repetition rather than speed. You measure twice, not out of caution but habit. No clear agreement has emerged about whether people experienced greater physical strain due to this constant manual labor, or whether adaptation reduced perceived effort over time. Using these tools now, you feel strain early, but also notice muscles learning quickly. Effort becomes predictable rather than overwhelming. Tools are shared carefully within the household, and sometimes among neighbors. Borrowing happens with respect. Returning something in worse condition damages trust. Carelessness is remembered. You notice how sound accompanies work. The scrape of metal. These noises inform you when something is wrong. A dull sound means a loose joint. A sharp one signals proper contact. Listening improves outcomes. An overlooked detail appears in some travel accounts describing how visitors could identify a settlement by the sound of its work long before seeing it. Different craft produced different rhythms. Communities had acoustic signatures. As daylight fades, tools are cleaned and set aside deliberately. Leaving something out invites moisture, rust, or misplacement. Order protects investment. You know exactly where everything belongs, because searching later costs time and warmth. Children learn tool respect early. They are taught what can be touched and what cannot. Fear is not exaggerated. Consequences explained. Competence arrives gradually. Some testimony points one way, while other evidence complicates how dangerous tool use truly was. Accidents happened certainly, yet familiarity reduced risk. Confidence grew alongside caution. By evening your hands ache pleasantly, not injury use. This sensation confirms the day had substance. Tools have done their work, you have done yours. In a world without electricity, tools do not promise ease. They promise possibility, and as you set them down carefully, you know tomorrow they will wait. Exactly where you left them, ready to continue the conversation between effort and outcome. Time behaves differently when it is not measured constantly. You feel this almost immediately. Once you stop looking for numbers, hours no longer stack neatly. They stretch and compress according to effort, light, and hunger. You do not ask what time it is. You ask what needs doing next. Morning feels long, not because it contains your body is strongest, then tasks flow one into another without interruption. You do not check progress. You sense it. When muscles tire, you switch tasks. When light shifts, you adjust position. Time reveals itself through sensation. Daily practice suggests that most people carried a remarkably accurate internal sense of passing hours. They knew roughly when noon arrived by the quality of light and the angle of shadow. Evening announced itself through fatigue and cooling air. This awareness replaced clocks without loss of precision where it mattered. You notice how hunger functions as a marker. When your stomach speaks, it is not demanding immediately. It is informing you that a phase of the day has ended. Meals divide time more effectively than alarms ever could. Eating becomes punctuation. A curious detail appears in several merchant journals describing travelers, estimating journey length by the number of meals rather than hours. A destination was 2 dinners away, or 1 sleep and a breakfast. Distance was experienced through the body rather than mapped abstractly. There is ongoing disagreement about whether this looser sense of time made people more patient or simply more resigned. Some interpretations suggest it reduced anxiety by removing constant comparison. Others argue it limited ambition by discouraging urgency. Living within it now, you feel how pressure softens when precision loosens. Waiting becomes normal, waiting for bread to rise, waiting for weather to shift, waiting for light. These pauses are not wasted, they're filled with smaller tasks. Time never truly sits empty. it just rearranges itself. You become aware of how often modern life interrupts itself. Here, interruption is rare. There are no notifications, no sudden demands from elsewhere. When something begins, it usually finishes. This continuity gives tasks weight and satisfaction. Children absorb this rhythm easily. They do not ask how long something will take. They ask whether it is finished yet. Completion matters more than duration. This changes how effort feels. You work until done, not until a timer allows rest. Some first-hand accounts suggest that people felt days moved faster despite doing more physical labour. Others imply days felt heavy and long during winter. You sense both truths depending on season and mood. Time here is not fixed. It responds to circumstance. Night darkness compresses time without light options narrow. An hour by fire feels longer than an hour of daylight work. Stillness expands awareness. Thoughts wander more freely. You notice that memory organizes itself differently too. Days are recalled by events rather than dates. The day the storm came, the day the roof was fixed, the night the fire. These anchors replace calendars. As you settle into evening, you feel no need to count what remains. The day has given what it could. Tomorrow will do the same. Time is not something you manage. It is something you inhabit in a world without electricity. Time stops chasing you. It walks alongside instead. Travel reshapes your sense of distance almost immediately. What once felt close now feels far. Not because the miles have changed, but because effort has. You prepare differently before leaving. You think in terms of daylight, weather and strength rather than routes and speed. Movement here is deliberate, never casual. You step onto a path worn smooth by years of passing feet, hooves and wheels. Roads exist, but they are uneven, muddy and unreliable. Travel accounts from the period make it unmistakable that most journeys took far longer than modern minds expect. Even over short distances, a few miles could consume most of a day if conditions turned poor. You carry what you need because nothing waits conveniently along the way. Food is packed. Water is considered. Extra cloth is folded carefully. Leaving unprepared feels reckless. There is no guarantee of shelter if something goes wrong. This awareness sharpens attention before you even take the first step. Walking becomes the default. Horses are valuable and not always available. Wagons move slowly and demand care. Each jolt matters. You learn to feel the land through your legs. Hills announce themselves early. Flat ground feels like relief rather than assumption. An unexpectedly human detail turns up in several travel journals describing people stopping frequently, not just to rest, but to listen. Sound carries differently in open spaces. Approaching travelers or animals are often heard before seen. Pausing allows the world to reveal itself safely. Weather dictates pace. A clear day invites progress. Wind drains energy quickly. Rain transforms paths into traps. Snow erases direction. You adjust without complaint. Complaining wastes breath better used for balance. There is no shared conclusion about whether people travelled more cautiously or simply accepted greater risk as normal. Some witnesses describe careful planning and conservative movement. Others recall bold journeys made out of necessity. As you move now, you sense how need can override caution without erasing it. Nightfall changes everything. You aim to stop before dark whenever possible. Travelling at night invites injury, disorientation, and fear. When darkness catches you anyway, progress slows to a careful shuffle. You feel for the ground rather than trusting sight. Encounters along the way feel meaningful. Passing another traveller prompts conversation. Information is exchanged quickly. Weather ahead, road conditions, news carried by word rather than wire. These moments remind you that movement connects communities even when it separates them physically. Some descriptions suggest people measured travel success not by arrival time, but by arriving unhurt and with supplies intact. Speed was secondary. Survival mattered more than efficiency. Fatigue builds differently when travel relies on muscle rather than machines. It settles deep and steady. You learn to recognize when pushing further risks more than it gains. Rest becomes strategy rather than weakness. As you finally stop for the night, wherever that may be, Relief spreads through your body. Not because the journey is over, but because you judged the day correctly. You moved as far as conditions allowed. You listened. You adapted. In a world without electricity, travel teaches humility. Distance is not conquered. It is negotiated step by step. News arrives slowly here, carried by breath rather than signal. You do not refresh anything. You listen. Information moves at the speed of people, and that changes how it feels when it finally reaches you. News is not constant background noise. It is an event. Someone arrives from another town and conversation gathers naturally. Chairs shift, work pauses, the tone changes slightly. What they bring matters because it took effort to carry distance, gives words weight. You learn to listen closely, not just to what is said, but to how it is said. Lived experience in the period shows that most people relied on spoken exchange for updates about the wider world. Letters existed, of course, but they travelled slowly and irregularly. Printed notices appeared in towns, but many never saw them. Voice remained the primary network. Stories unfold gradually. A piece of information is offered, questions follow. Details are filled in. Sometimes facts shift slightly as they pass from mouth to mouth. This does not feel dishonest. It feels memory shapes news as much as accuracy does. An unexpectedly human detail turns up in several traveller accounts describing how people repeated important news aloud multiple times to fix it in memory. Without paper at hand, repetition became storage. You catch yourself doing the same, quietly replaying what you heard to make sure it stays. Rumours exist, but they behave differently. Without instant amplification, they rise and fall based on trust rather than speed. A person known for exaggeration loses influence quickly. A careful speaker earns attention. Reputation acts as a filter. Views still differ on how accurate information truly was under these conditions. Some historians emphasize distortion, delay. Others argue that slower movement reduced panic and allowed communities to process news more thoughtfully. Sitting here now, you sense how slowness gives space for judgment. Bad news feels heavier. There is no buffer, no scrolling past when someone tells you of illness, loss, or conflict elsewhere. The room absorbs it fully. Silence follows. Attention is given. This shared weight creates a different kind of seriousness. Good news spreads gently. A birth, a safe arrival, a successful harvest nearby. These details lift the room without spectacle. Celebration remains contained. Gratitude replaces excitement. Children listen too, absorbing geography and consequence through story rather than map. They learn where places are by who travelled there and how long it took. Distance becomes narrative rather than measurement. Some first-hand descriptions suggest that people felt more connected to nearby events and less anxious about distant ones. Without constant updates, concerns stayed local. You notice how your own focus narrows naturally. What happens close matters most. When letters do arrive, they're handled carefully. Read aloud, passed around, folded neatly, and saved. Paper carries voice across time. Ink preserves breath. You feel the intimacy of it. As evening settles, the news of the day finishes circulating. Nothing more will arrive until someone moves again. There is relief in that finality. You are allowed to stop processing. In a world without electricity, information does not chase you. It waits to be carried. And when it arrives, you meet it fully, then let it rest. Religion weaves itself into the day without demanding attention. You notice it most in the spaces between tasks in habit, so familiar they no longer feel like instruction. Faith here is not confined to a building or a single hour. It settles into routine, quietly shaping behavior more than conversation. You sense it in the way the week is organized. Certain days carry a different weight. Work slows or stops entirely. Clothes are chosen more carefully. Voices soften. The rhythm changes without explanation because everyone understands why. Surviving descriptions make it unmistakable that religious observance structured time as much as daylight did. Prayer happens privately as often as it happens together. A few words murmured before eating, a pause before sleep. These moments are brief but consistent. They do not interrupt life. They accompany it. Faith becomes a backdrop rather than a performance. Gatherings bring people together in ways that feel both social and serious. Meeting houses are simple, seating is hard, sermons are long. Attention is expected. Children learn to sit still early, not because it is pleasant, but because it is part of belonging. An unexpectedly human detail turns up in several accounts describing how people judge sermons less by theology and more by whether the speaker held attention through the full hour. Restlessness was common, falling asleep happened quietly and without shame. Long days made heavy listening difficult. No shared conclusion has ever fully settled regarding how deeply belief shaped personal conviction versus social expectation. Some observers emphasize genuine devotion. Others suggest conformity played a larger role. Sitting among the gathered now, you sense that belief and habit overlap so completely they are difficult to separate. Religion also governs behavior beyond worship. It influences honesty, reputation, and obligation. Promises are taken seriously because breaking them carries moral weight, as well as social consequence. Accountability feels layered rather than enforced. You notice how comfort is drawn from familiarity. Hymns are sung slowly, voices uneven but sincere. Words are known by heart. Singing warms the room slightly. Breath sinks. Sound fills space left by silence. Children absorb belief through repetition rather than explanation. Stories are told, lessons implied, questions are answered simply when they arise. Faith grows through presence rather than argument. Some first-hand recollection suggests that religious routine provided stability during uncertainty. Others hint that rigid observance caused tension and fear. Living within it now, you sense both reassurance and pressure existing side by side. As the day continues, religious language appears casually. Blessings are offered without drama. Thanks are given for small mercies. These phrases anchor experience, providing meaning without demanding analysis. By evening, faith returns quietly, a final prayer, a moment of reflection, not because it is required, but because it feels unfinished otherwise. Habit creates closure in a world without electricity. Belief offers structure when other systems are absent. It marks time. It binds people. It softens uncertainty even when answers remain incomplete. And as night gathers once more, faith settles back into the background, present but unspoken, waiting for the next day to begin. Fear feels different after sundown. It does not leap out dramatically. It seeps in through imagination and uncertainty, shaped by what you cannot see rather than what you can. Darkness narrows the world until familiar paths feel longer and known sounds feel altered. You do not panic, but you stay alert. You notice how behavior shifts as light fades. Doors are checked more than once. Tools are placed. The fire is fed carefully. These actions are not born of constant terror. They are habits shaped by experience. When night removes visibility, preparation replaces confidence. Accounts from the period consistently reveal that danger after dark was taken seriously, even in familiar places. Fools' fires and unexpected encounters all carried higher risk without light. This awareness does not make you fearful. It makes you deliberate. Outside, animals move more freely. You hear them rather than see them. A rustle in the brush could be nothing or something worth noting. You listen longer before dismissing it. Livestock noises are reassuring. Silence from them, an unusual but well-attested practice, involved people leaving small markers near doors or paths that could be felt by foot or hand in the dark. A stone, a notch, a change in texture. These tactile cues guided movement safely when sight failed. You find yourself appreciating how thoughtful this simple solution feels inside. Shadows stretch and reshape familiar objects. The mind fills in gaps. You learn which shapes can be ignored and which require attention. Over time, imagination calms. The house becomes readable even in darkness. Interpretations still vary regarding how much night fear influenced daily stress in early America. Some portray constant anxiety. Others describe practical caution without emotional burden. Sitting quietly, now you feel vigilance without dread. Fear exists, but it is managed rather than indulged. Stories about danger circulate, but they function as instruction more than entertainment. Tales of fire spreading or travelers lost emphasize lessons. Do not leave flame unattended. Do not travel too late. Do not ignore warning signs. Fear teaches without overwhelming. Children learn night caution gradually. They are not shielded from darkness, but they are guided through it. Hands are held, bathers are explained. Confidence grows through familiarity. Night becomes something to respect rather than fear. Locks exist, but trust matters more. Doors are secured. Community vigilance fills the gaps. Knowing neighbours are listening to reduces isolation. Shared awareness spreads risk thinly across many households. As you prepare for sleep, fear quiets. You have done what can be done. Fire is banked. Doors are closed. The rest belongs to the night. Worry has diminishing returns now. Some recollections suggest people slept with heightened awareness, waking easily to unfamiliar sounds. Others describe deep rest despite potential danger. You suspect both depended on context and experience. Familiar places soften fear, unknown ones sharpen it. Lying still, you hear the house settle again. Nothing is wrong. That knowledge brings calm. Darkness loses its edge when understood. Fear recedes into background awareness where it belongs. In a world without electricity, night does not promise safety. It invites responsibility, and as you breathe steadily in the dark, you realize that preparedness, not fear, is what carries you through until morning. Comfort reveals itself in small ways. Now, not in abundance, but in contrast. After a day shaped by effort, restraint and awareness, even modest relief feels generous. You begin to notice how little it takes to feel settled. Warmth at the right moment, a place to sit without rushing. Silence that does not demand attention. You wrap a blanket around your shoulders and feel the difference immediately. Wool holds heat with quiet persistence. This is not luxury as modern culture defines it, but it is unmistakably comforting. Surviving household descriptions make it clear that warmth was one of the most valued conditions of daily life, especially after sundown. You savor simple things, a cup of something warm, the steady glow of embers, a familiar voice nearby. These moments do not interrupt life, they complete it. Comfort here is earned through contrast. Without the cold warmth would not feel this good. Without effort, rest would feel empty. An unexpectedly tender detail appears in several family letters describing people saving small comforts for the end of the day. A bit of honey, a softer seat, a favourite blanket. These were not indulgences taken lightly. They were rewards consciously delayed to make them matter more. You notice how your body responds. Muscles release slowly, breathing deepens. Thoughts lose their sharp edges. This easing is physical, not psychological. Comfort works on the body first, then the mind follows. There is no shared agreement about whether people in this era felt deprived compared to later generations. Some argue hardship dominated daily life. Others point out that expectations were shaped differently, making small pleasures more satisfying. Sitting here now, you feel how relative comfort truly is. Light plays a role too. Firelight softens the room. Harsh edges disappear. Faces look gentler. Even worn objects seem kinder under this glow. Comfort is partly visual, created by shadows that forgive imperfections. Sound contributes as well. A crackle, a sigh, a quiet word. These noises reassure rather than stimulate. They tell you nothing urgent is required. Rest is permitted. Children respond to comfort instinctively. They lean closer. They settle more quickly. This response is learned early. Warmth and safety signal when the day is done. No explanation is necessary. Some period observers noted that people appeared more content during moments of rest than during moments of celebration. Festivities were rare and demanding. Quiet comfort was frequent and restorative. You begin to understand why. As the evening deepens, comfort narrows rather than expands. You do not seek more stimulation. You seek enough warmth, enough light, enough company. Anything beyond that would feel excessive. Eventually, comfort becomes stillness. You stop adjusting, you stop reaching, you simply remain where warmth holds longest. The body recognizes when it has what it needs. In a world without electricity, comfort is not constant. That is what makes it precious. And as you settle deeper into it now, you understand that comfort here is not about having more, it is about noticing when enough has arrived. Luxury means something very different to you now. It is not excess, it is relief, it is the absence of strain rather than the presence of abundance. You realize this as you sit quietly and notice that nothing is pressing on you at this moment. No urgent task, no failing fire, no approaching storm. That absence feels rich. Objects once considered ordinary take on new importance. A sturdy chair that does not wobble, a door that closes tightly against the wind, a pot without cracks. These things do not draw attention to themselves until they fail. When they work well, they fade into the background, quietly supporting life. That quiet reliability becomes a form of wealth. Written inventories from the period consistently show that households prize durability above novelty. Items were valued not for how new they were, but for how long they lasted. A well-made tool or garment carried more status than something decorative. Longevity was visible proof of good judgment. You feel the shift in how you look at belongings. Fewer items feel like a loss. They feel like focus. Each possession earns its place through use. Ownership becomes intentional rather than aspirational. Nothing here exists to impress anyone who is not present. An unexpectedly revealing detail appears in several estate lists where families owned only one or two truly fine objects. A polished cup, a carved chest. These pieces were cared for meticulously and brought out on special occasions. Their rarity made them meaningful, rather than fragile. There is no settled view among historians on whether people desired more comfort than they had, or whether they recalibrated their desires entirely. Some evidence suggests longing for ease existed. Other records show contentment rooted in familiarity. As you sit with what you have now, desire feels quieter, not absent, just subdued. Luxury also shows up in time. An afternoon without interruption, an evening without wind, a morning when the fire catches easily. These moments feel generous because they cannot be purchased or stored. They arrive when conditions align. You notice how sharing enhances this feeling. A warm space feels warmer when someone else is there. Food tastes better when eaten together. Even silence feels fuller when it is shared. Luxury here is rarely solitary. Clothing reinforces this idea. A garment that fits well and keeps out the cold feels indulgent, even if it is plain. Comfort on the body translates directly into comfort in the mind. You stop wishing it looked different. You are grateful it works. Some observers from later centuries remarked on how restrained people appear, despite limited resources. Others interpreted the restraint as suppression. Living within it now, you sense that restraint creates clarity. Want narrows, satisfaction sharpens. As night settles in, you realize luxury does not accumulate. It appears briefly, then passes. You enjoy it without trying to hold on to it. Tomorrow will require effort again. That does not diminish tonight. It defines it. In a world without electricity, luxury is not constant. It is momentary and deeply felt. And as you sit quietly wrapped in warmth and quiet, you understand that luxury here is not about having more. It is about needing less. Endurance sneaks up on you quietly. There is no moment when you decide you have become resilient. It happens through repetition, through mornings that ask the same things of you again and again until effort no longer feels exceptional. What once felt difficult becomes ordinary without ceremony. You notice this shift in your body first. Movements require less thought. Lifting feels more natural. Cold stings less sharply. Hunger speaks more softly. Daily life itself makes clear that adaptation is not dramatic. It is incremental. The body learns because it must. Surviving descriptions leave little room for doubt that people grew accustomed to conditions that would shock modern sensibilities. Cold rooms, long days, limited light. These were not temporary challenges. They were constants, Over time, constant pressure reshaped expectation rather than breaking it. You realize you complain less internally, not because things improve, but because your baseline has changed. Discomfort fades into background awareness. You still notice it, but it no longer dominates attention. This frees mental space for other things: observation, planning, rest. A quietly strange custom shows up in a few frontier accounts where newcomers were advised not to over-prepare for hardship. Too many layers, too much food too early. Overcompensation made adaptation harder. The advice was to arrive simply and let the body learn. Whether intentional or not, this approach mirrors what you feel now. There is no single explanation that has ever fully convinced everyone when it comes to how much of this endurance was physical versus psychological. Some first-hand voices suggest bodies hardened quickly. Others hint that mindset mattered just as much. Living within it now, you sense the two intertwining. The body adjusts and belief follows. You stop thinking of this life as demanding. It simply is. That shift matters. When hardship loses its label, it loses some of its weight. Effort becomes routine rather than. Children demonstrate this most clearly. They do not marvel at the cold. They accept it. They do not dramatize hunger. They wait. Endurance arrives early when it is modeled consistently. You see it in how easily they move through the same spaces. Adults navigate carefully. Rest becomes deeper as endurance grows. When your body trusts its own strength, it releases tension more fully. Sleep arrives faster. Muscles recover more reliably. The cycle reinforces itself. Some observers from later centuries misunderstood this steadiness as dullness. Others romanticized it as toughness. Standing here now, you recognize it as normalization. Humans adjust. That ability is neither glamorous nor grim. It is practical as seasons turn. Endurance carries forward. What you learnt in winter reshapes summer. What you learnt in scarcity informs abundance. Nothing is wasted. Experience accumulates quietly. By the time night settles again, you realize you are no longer bracing yourself. You are simply living within the conditions presented. That realization feels calm rather than triumphant. In a world without electricity, endurance does not announce itself. It becomes the ground you stand on. Your body begins to move at a different speed now, and you hardly notice when it happens. Urgency drains away first, then impatience. What replaces them is a steadiness that feels almost old-fashioned, as if your muscles remember something your mind forgot long ago. You do not rush because nothing here responds well to rushing. You wake and work without the subtle tension modern life trains into you. There is no background hum pushing you forward. No invisible clock urging efficiency. Daily life itself makes clear that haste wastes energy more often than it saves it. Tasks unfold in sequence rather than competition. You feel this change most clearly during simple actions. Walking becomes even breathing slows. Hands pause naturally between movements, instead of snapping from one thing to the next. This pace is not laziness. It is alignment. Your body matches the world instead of fighting it. Surviving descriptions from the 18th century often remark on how people could work for long hours without appearing frantic. Labor was steady rather than explosive. Strength was conserved rather than spent all at once. This rhythm protected the body over years rather than days. A quietly revealing habit appears in some personal journals, where writers note deliberately slowing their movements during cold weather, even indoors. Fast emotion increased sweating, which then invited chill. Slowness preserved warmth. You feel the wisdom of this now, as you rise carefully, instead of springing up. No single explanation has convinced everyone as to whether this slower rhythm was a conscious choice, or simply the absence of alternatives. Some voices suggest people valued calm intentionally. Others imply that without fast tools, speed never became an option. Living within it now, the distinction feels unimportant. The result is the same. You notice how thoughts change alongside movement without constant interruption. Ideas stretch out, reflection deepens. You think things through instead of skimming past them. Memory sharpens because it has room to form. Children mirror this pace effortlessly. They move quickly when needed, but not compulsively. Stillness does not bother them. Waiting does not irritate them. This suggests slowness is learned only when something pushes against it. Sound feels different too. Without hurry, noises stand out more clearly. The scrape of a chair, the sigh of wind through cracks. You register these details without tension. Awareness replaces alertness. Some later observers mistook this pace for passivity. Others envied it. Sitting here now, you recognize it as balance. Energy is spent where it matters, and saved where it does not. As evening approaches, your body is tired but not afraid. Muscles ache with use rather than strain. There is no sense of being wrung out. Work has taken its share and left you intact. You lie down and feel how easily sleep approaches. There is no leftover urgency vibrating under the surface. The day resolved itself naturally. Nothing remains undone that could have been done better by force. In a world without electricity, slowness is not an aesthetic choice. It is a survival strategy that quietly becomes a gift. Night returns the way it always does, without drama and without asking permission. The fire settles, shadows stretch, and then dissolve completely. What remains is breath warmth held close, and the quiet certainty that the day has reached its natural end. You do not feel the need to review what you accomplished. Living here teaches you that completion does not require reflection to be valid. You prepare for sleep with practice calm. The fire is banked, doors are checked, tools rest where they belong. These actions no longer feel like chores. They feel like closing sentences at the end of a long paragraph, necessary, familiar, and satisfying. Surviving descriptions from early America leave little room for doubt that nights were treated as a distinct phase of life rather than a continuation of the day. Darkness signaled release. Labor paused. Not because everything was finished, but because the body and light both agreed it was time. You lie down and feel how easily your body accepts stillness. Now muscles soften without argument, breath deepens. Cold presses gently at the edges, but it no longer feels threatening. You have learned how to meet it. Blankets hold. Walls stand. Fire glows faintly enough. A quietly poignant custom appears in a few household writings, describing people whispering small acknowledgements before sleep. Gratitude for a fire that held, for weather that allowed work, for health that lasted another day. These moments were brief and personal, never ceremonial. You find yourself doing the same without planning to. No single explanation has ever fully satisfied everyone. When it comes to whether people living before electricity felt their lives were harder or simply different. Some voices emphasize struggle, others emphasize sufficiency. As you rest here now, the distinction feels less important. What matters is that life fits together in a way that makes sense. You listen one last time to the house. Wood settles. Someone exhales nearby. Outside, the night moves on its own terms. Nothing demands your attention. That permission to stop feels profound. You think briefly of modern light, of switches and screens, and endless extension of day into night. The contrast is striking but not painful. Here, limits feel protective rather than restrictive. They create edges where rest can collect. Sleep comes gently, not as escape, but as continuation. The same rhythms that guided your waking hours now guide your dreams. The body trusts this cycle because it has proven reliable. Tomorrow will begin again with light rather than sound, with cold rather than alarm, with movement rather than urgency. That knowledge does not weigh on you. It reassures you. And as the last thoughts fade, you are held by the same quiet that has carried countless nights before this one. Now everything softens. The fire has become a quiet memory of warmth rather than a presence you need to watch. Your breathing slows without effort. Thoughts stretch out, then loosen, then drift away entirely. There is no need to hold on to the day anymore. It has already done what it needed to do. You feel how steady your body is, supported, resting where it belongs. Muscles let go one by one. Jaw relaxes, hands open slightly. Even your thoughts seem to lie down beside you instead of circling. Outside, the world continues without asking anything of you. Wind moves where it will. Night creatures pass unseen. The dark does not threaten. It simply exists wide and patient. You are safe inside this rhythm. A rhythm shaped by light and darkness, effort and rest, warmth and cold. Nothing rushes. Nothing interrupts. There is nowhere you need to be other than here if your mind wanders. Let it. Let it drift the way smoke does when the fire finally settles. There is no problem to solve, no plan to make. Morning will arrive when it is ready, just as it always has. For now, you are allowed to disappear into rest. Sleep takes you gently, without effort, without resistance. And if you wake briefly, that is fine.